Maybe it started as a simple gesture, a weekend visit, a cup of coffee served with care, a warm hug at the door, but something lingered in the air, a silence hidden between compliments and commands. A "how are you?" followed by, "Why didn't you do what I told you?" That meeting, which should have been full of affection, ended with the feeling that you were being corrected, as if you were a disobedient child. And no matter how many times it happens, it hurts a little more each time, because it's not what is said, it's how. It's the weight of feeling watched, judged, controlled by someone you raised with love. Maybe you know the story of Antonio and Lydia, or maybe you're living something similar. At 78 years old, they decided to cut contact with their eldest son, a son who claimed he was taking care of them but who actually controlled everything. Their cards, schedules, purchases, even the furniture layout. "It's for your own good," he said. "Don't worry about anything." And while the gestures seemed caring, the feeling was different. They couldn't leave the house without asking. They couldn't buy anything without approval. Even a vase moved out of place caused a scolding. He didn't love them, he dominated them. But for a long time they couldn't see it. Because it's hard to admit that your own child has become the keeper of your prison. Many parents live this reality, an invisible pattern of emotional blackmail, where affection appears only when there's something to gain. And that hurts more than full absence, because it mixes love with fear, affection with guilt, and the heart gets confused. That son, or daughter, shows up when they want money, when they want something, when they ask about the will, and they come smiling with hugs, saying they've missed you, but then they disappear until the next demand. Freud helps us understand some of this dynamic. He spoke of unconscious drives, desires, frustrations, and fears that guide us without our awareness. Many children, growing up with unresolved wounds, transfer their insecurities onto their parents, and instead of healing, they control. They say they care, but they punish. They say it's for your good, but they are taking revenge. And over time, the relationship stops being familial and becomes a silent battleground. "He said it was for my own good, but he kept me hostage." This sentence, said through tears by an 82-year-old mother, echoes in many hearts. Maybe it echoes in yours too, because what's at stake here isn't just the relationship with your child. It's your freedom, your dignity, your peace, and that's what we'll talk about, calmly, respectfully, with courage, because maybe it's time for you to see what once seemed only confusing. True love does not imprison. Have you ever heard that sentence? Maybe not with those exact words, but with that tone that mixes care with command. "Let me know when you arrive. Don't go out alone. You're getting confused. Let me handle it." Words that sound protective but quietly strip away your autonomy. Little by little, you begin to doubt your own abilities, and what once felt like affection becomes an emotional prison where you no longer know what you can or cannot do without the permission of someone who is supposed to love you, not supervise you. This reversal of roles is so subtle, it often goes unnoticed. The son, who should have learned to live independently, places himself in the parent's role. He starts making the rules, controlling decisions, pointing fingers, as if he knows more about your life than you do. And the cruelest part, he does it all in the name of love. He says he's caring, that he's protecting, but he's not. He's taking away your right to decide, to make mistakes, to live. And when you try to resist, he says you're overreacting. "I only want what's best for you. You're not seeing things clearly." And that's where the doubt begins. This kind of prolonged emotional manipulation, known to many therapists as gaslighting, has a devastating effect, especially in old age, because you start to question yourself. You start to think maybe you are overreacting, that maybe it's easier to give in, and so you give in. A little today, a little tomorrow, until there's nothing left, only silence, only resignation, only the fear of losing what little affection still remains, even if it's conditional. From a psychoanalytic perspective, Freud spoke of the superego, the part of the mind that internalizes rules, demands, and criticism. In many elderly parents, this superego becomes confused with the voice of the child, the voice that judges, that dictates what is right and wrong, that highlights faults, that demands perfection. And this voice becomes so strong that even when the child isn't around, it keeps speaking inside your head, keeping the control, keeping the fear alive. Neuroscience explains that, as the years go by, the brain becomes more sensitive to fear. The feeling of dependency increases, and someone who understands this can use it against you. A child who knows your physical limitations, your emotional pain, your insecurities, can use all of it to keep you in a state of submission, not out of love, but out of control. And that's where a painful image arises, one many parents have described: the feeling of living in a golden cage. The house is clean, meals are served, the child brings medication, helps with bills, calls to check in, but you feel suffocated, because every gesture comes with a price, because every help comes with a condition, because you can no longer be who you are, only what they want you to be. That golden cage may look like protection, but it's a prison, it's domination, it's erasure. And maybe you're sitting there right now in silence, trying to understand how it got to this point, how the boy you raised with so much love became someone who now decides your life for you. And maybe the answer won't come easily, but one thing needs to be said, with all the respect you deserve to hear: this is not care, it's control. This is not love, it's domination. This is not protection, it's imprisonment. And you are not alone, and you are not wrong for feeling that something is not right, because it isn't. And recognizing that is already a beginning of freedom, a beginning of return to yourself, a beginning that can, finally, give you back the right to breathe in peace. There's a kind of pain few dare to name, the feeling of being loved only for what you can give, not for who you are. Many elderly parents live through this kind of relationship without realizing it, until their child's gestures start to follow a pattern. He shows up at the beginning of the month. He calls when he knows the retirement money has arrived. He's more affectionate when there are promises of inheritance or gifts, and on the other days he disappears. He doesn't ask if you slept well. He doesn't care if you cried yesterday. He shows no real interest in your life, unless it involves some benefit for him. Maybe you noticed it little by little. Maybe it hit you when a hug was followed by a request, when a family lunch ended with a bank transfer, when an expensive gift came with a smile and an unspoken debt. Now you owe me, not in words but in looks, in silence, in expectation. And your soul feels it, your body senses it. There's a kind of exhaustion that settles in when love turns into currency. This behavior triggers a cruel emotional cycle, the cycle of reward and punishment. On the days you give in, he's sweet. When you say yes, he praises you. But when you dare to say no, even gently, the mood shifts. The silence grows heavy, the guilt creeps in, and your heart feels confused. Freud would explain this as a game of emotional transference. The child, unconsciously, repeats patterns of conditional affection that he once experienced, but now, he projects them onto you. At some point in life, he learned that love comes only when something is given, and now he applies that logic to the one who should have received his love unconditionally, you. Dopamine, the chemical linked to pleasure and reward, also plays a role here. Each time you please or give in, there's a momentary relief, a false peace, and that keeps you trapped, because the fear of losing that crumb of affection is stronger than the courage to say enough. And that's how many parents become emotional and financial ATMs. They are only activated when there is something to give. Think back to that time when you said no, maybe for the first time in years. The silence that followed was more painful than any shout. He didn't argue, he just withdrew. He made you feel guilty, as if you had done something wrong, but you didn't. What hurts is the absence of real love. What wounds is realizing that when the money disappears, so does the child. And that's not family, that's emotional exploitation. Maybe no one has ever told you this before, but it needs to be said clearly. Love doesn't demand. Love doesn't show up only on retirement days. Love isn't sustained by favors. Love doesn't depend on inheritance. If your child's affection comes with conditions, with demands, with fixed schedules and strategic dates, then maybe what you're receiving isn't love. It's an unsigned contract that's draining your peace without you realizing it. And recognizing this is not selfish. It's clarity. It's the first step to leaving a cycle that consumes your peace and your self-worth. You have the right to expect genuine presence, not visits marked by interest. You have the right to say no and still be loved. You have the right to exist and even when there's nothing to offer. And that is already the beginning of a quiet freedom. The freedom to be seen, not just used. The freedom to breathe, without the burden of love disguised as a debt. For many fathers and mothers, retirement was supposed to be a time of rest, peace, and the freedom to finally live at their own pace. But for others, it turns into a new kind of captivity, an emotional prison built from guilt, fear, and emotional dependence. The routine changes, the body asks for more care, and it's in this moment of vulnerability that the controlling child often sees the chance to take over every space, not to support, but to dominate. Maybe you've heard phrases like, If you leave this house, I'll never speak to you again. Or perhaps, you can't do that alone. I don't trust that you know what you're doing. At first, those words sound like protection, but over time, you realize you're being diminished, emotionally weakened, even infantilized. You no longer feel capable of making decisions on your own, and that doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because someone decided it was easier to keep you under control than to allow your autonomy. Many children, when they notice their parents are more physically vulnerable, use that fragility as an argument. They say they're taking care, but they impose rules, arbitrary limits, emotional blackmail. They forbid visits, choose who you can or can't talk to, control your meals, your schedule, your words. And the most painful part, they make you believe you're being ungrateful for being bothered by this. Freud would call this emotional repression, when you feel anger, sadness, or anguish, but immediately censor yourself because you believe it's wrong to feel that way towards someone who is helping you. And over time, that inner silence suffocates everything. You feel trapped, but there are no bars, no chains, trapped by invisible obedience, built with guilt-ridden phrases, reproachful looks, and threats disguised as love. And so retirement, which should be a new beginning, turns into a long ending filled with surveillance and loneliness. Because control pushes friendships away, it breaks ties with neighbors, silences phone calls, isolates, and in that isolation, the child becomes everything: reference, judge, caretaker, and warden. That's why so many elderly parents are afraid to say no, not because they don't know what they want, but because they're afraid of being abandoned, afraid of being alone, afraid they won't be able to cope. And that fear paralyzes. It blocks speech, it blocks gestures, it blocks the body. But it is possible to break this cycle with dignity, with wisdom, with clear limits. One technique that can help is what we call an emotional coexistence contract. A simple, yet symbolic agreement where you write down what is care and what is intrusion, what is support and what is control. This contract doesn't need to be legal. It just needs to be respected by you, first of all. And if you still can't say it out loud, start with a symbolic act. Take an old suitcase. Put in it items that represent your autonomy: a book, a radio, a comfortable pair of shoes. It doesn't matter if you're going anywhere or not. That suitcase is your silent affirmation that you can still go, that you still have choices, that you still exist beyond the role of being obedient. Leave that suitcase in sight, as a reminder, as a statement, as the seed of a new freedom that often begins with small gestures. Because caring is not imprisoning, loving is not monitoring, and protecting is not dominating. Retirement should not be a time to lose who you are, but to rediscover more deeply everything you can still be. And you can, even if today you still don't believe it, you can. Some decisions aren't made all at once. They are shaped in silence, like a seed that endures the darkness of the soil until the moment it breaks through. And that's how it was for Donna Ruth, 79 years old, mother of 3, who one day simply closed the door. She locked it firmly. Not out of anger, not in a dramatic outburst, but with the serenity of someone who had endured too much for too long. Her eldest son, who for years had controlled her under the pretense of concern, came for another visit full of demands. She served the coffee, listened quietly, and when he left, she knew it was the last time. On the table, she left a letter, simple, handwritten. Here ends the cycle of blind obedience. I will no longer stay silent in the name of a peace that never existed. I will no longer open the door for someone who only enters to silence me. I am still someone, and that is enough. This letter wasn't a violent break. It was a birth. The birth of a voice that had been silenced for decades by fear, guilt, and the hope that one day her son would change. But he didn't, because he never had to, because he always had the power of guilt on his side. And it was in the silence that followed that the truth revealed itself. Her son didn't come back, didn't call, didn't apologize. He didn't cry for her. He cried for himself, for the loss of control, for the end of the routine where he commanded, and she obeyed. And in that silence, Donna Ruth discovered something she had never felt before: lightness. Not the lightness of forgetting, but the lightness of no longer carrying the weight of submission, of no longer needing permission to exist. Freud helps us understand this kind of liberation as the overcoming of unconscious transference. For years, she saw in that son the image of something she needed to fix, someone she needed to save, as if he were the final proof of her mission as a mother. And when she closed the door, she didn't just end a relationship with an abusive son. She closed a cycle of guilt that wasn't hers, a cycle inherited, learned, internalized, and there, alone, she began to live something new, the emotional maturity that only comes when we recognize ourselves as subjects, not as shadows of someone else's expectations. The image of the wolf in sheep's clothing perfectly describes what many parents experience. The son who seems sensitive, who cries, who claims to be concerned, but who never listens, never respects, never welcomes. Yes, he cries, but not for you. He cries because he lost control. He suffers, but for the loss of dominance. Because deep down, he never wanted a whole mother. He wanted an obedient one, someone always available, even when wounded, even when erased. And when that ends, his true face is revealed. Maybe you're at that point in the road where everything feels about to break, but you still don't know how. You're still unsure if you should, you're still afraid, and that's okay, because courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward despite the fear, and each small act, a closed door, a written letter, a silence held, can be the beginning of your turning point. And maybe, like Donna Ruth, you won't need to shout to be heard. You just need to stop opening the door for those who only enter to silence you. That alone is more than a beginning. It's a rebirth, and you deserve to live this new life without fear of who walks away, but with love for the person you are becoming. Not all pain is visible, and few wounds are as lonely as realizing that even when surrounded by children, you are emotionally alone. When one child becomes abusive, manipulative, or controlling, many parents hope, at the very least, that the other children will see it, that they'll take a stand, that they'll offer support. But what often happens is the opposite. The siblings stay quiet. They distance themselves. They pretend not to see. They say things like, "He's always been like that. Just let it go. It's not that bad." And that silence hurts like a second rejection, as if now the abandonment is collective. This quiet complicity, disguised as neutrality, reveals something deeper. Fear of confrontation, fear of displeasing, a desire to maintain the illusion of a united family at all costs. But the price of that illusion is high, because someone who is suffering doesn't need a silent audience, and they need real support. Someone to say, "I see what you're going through. This isn't fair to you." And when that support doesn't come, the pain intensifies. It becomes even harder to name. Freud helps us understand this behavior through the concept of repression. Often, the siblings who stay silent are repressing their own guilt, their own discomfort. It's easier to pretend nothing is happening than to admit that something is deeply wrong. They don't want to be seen as ungrateful. They don't want to stir things up. They prefer to preserve the relationship with the abusive sibling, even if it costs their mother or father's well-being. And in that silent choice, the bond with you breaks. This omission creates a specific kind of loneliness, the loneliness of being betrayed without words, of feeling that you can no longer trust anyone in your own family, and that feeling eats away at you. It makes the body sick. It makes the soul retreat. And even so, many parents keep trying to bring the family together. They keep organizing lunches. They keep honoring holidays, with the hope that one day the silence will turn into action. But sometimes, it doesn't. That's why it's essential to build an alternative support network, not to replace your children, but to remind you that you are not alone. A group of parents who share similar pain, a therapist who listens without judgment, a longtime friend who knows your heart. These people won't erase the pain, but they can help you stay afloat in it, because you don't have to face everything alone. You don't have to keep justifying the unjustifiable. You don't have to keep waiting for those who chose not to see. And if a child ever tells you, "He's always been like that," let it go. Remember, those who minimize someone else's pain are also participating in it, not directly, but through omission. And omission also hurts. It also wounds. It also imprisons. Maybe today you're sitting in silence, afraid of distancing yourself from everyone, afraid of becoming even more alone. But there is a kind of silence that doesn't isolate, that protects, that preserves your dignity. The silence of someone who no longer begs for attention, who chooses with maturity where it is worth investing presence. Because not every blood tie is a bond of affection, and not every family means belonging. You have the right to choose who stays close. And above all, you have the right to protect yourself from those who, even in silence, still hurt you. There comes a moment when the waiting simply stops, not out of disappointment, but out of exhaustion. A quiet exhaustion built up over the years, made of unanswered texts, missed calls, and empty promises that were never fulfilled. And then one day you type again, something simple, a "how are you?" a "just checking in." And for the first time, You don't send it. You look at the screen and choose silence. Choose not to beg. Choose not to chase. And strangely, you feel relief. That moment, which might seem small, marks a deep turning point. It's the instant when you realize you've already given all you could, that loving is no longer enough when the other person insists on ignoring, manipulating, or controlling. And what you feel is not revenge. It's freedom. The freedom of someone who discovers they no longer need to chase after a love that never came fully, who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone, who no longer needs to wait for an apology that may never come. Freud described this process as symbolic mourning. It's not grieving someone who died. It's grieving a bond that only existed in hope. It's grieving an idealized child who never became the image you carried in your heart. And yes, this mourning hurts, but it also cleanses. It also creates space. It also frees. That's what happened to Mr. Alvaro, 83 years old. He shared that after years of sending messages to his son and receiving only cold replies, late responses, or none at all, he decided to stop writing, not out of pride, but out of respect for himself. One day he silenced his phone and sat in his backyard, alone, with no noise, no waiting, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. A peace that didn't depend on reconciliation, that didn't depend on a reply, that didn't depend on return. A peace born from the end of expectation, from the end of a hope that only brought pain. This gesture, turning off the phone, silencing the app, not responding, is not coldness. It's emotional protection. It's the clean cut so many need but fear making, and there's a technique that can help with this process. Visualizing emotional closure. Close your eyes. Picture the child you've spent years chasing. See yourself handing them a letter, not to hurt, but to say, "I tried, I waited, I loved." And then, imagine yourself turning away, not in anger, but with dignity, walking toward your own life, not into emptiness, but into a new inner space where you can exist without begging for affection. Because you don't need messages to feel worthy. You don't need confirmation to know you were a good father, a good mother. You no longer need to live in the illusion that love will come someday. If all that's come so far are demands and indifference, you deserve peace. You deserve rest. You deserve silence, the kind that doesn't hurt, but heals. The silence of reconciliation with yourself, where finally, peace has arrived. It was an ordinary afternoon. The house was quiet, the table set for one, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the absence as pain. She felt it as space. She sat slowly, took a deep breath, adjusted the silverware, sipped her coffee without hurry. No noise from the phone, no footsteps in the hallway, no demands, no fear. And there, alone, she realized this wasn't loneliness. It was peace. A peace she had earned, not been given. A peace born from the exhaustion of always being the one who gives in, who waits, who tries to hold together a relationship that only hurts. This woman, who could be you or someone you know, found strength in the silence. She discovered she no longer needed to explain her choices, that she didn't have to defend herself from her children's veiled criticisms, the comparisons between siblings, or the messages that never came. She discovered their absence didn't diminish her, that her existence had value, even without applause, even without a response. And in that moment, she understood something profound. She hadn't lost children. She had found herself again. It was at a reading group months later that she shared her story. She said that at 81 years old she chose to cut ties, that she cried, that she was afraid, that she doubted herself many times, but that when she stopped trying to prove she deserved love, she began to live. She said that for the first time, she looked in the mirror and didn't see a tired mother, but a whole woman. A woman who cared, who loved, who gave, but who now also chose to care for herself. Freud said that suffering needs meaning to be transformed, and she gave her pain meaning, turned abandonment into reconnection, rejection into presence, guilt into freedom. She realized that for decades, she had confused love with obedience, confused respect with silence, and now at last she understood. True love does not demand submission. True love does not condition. True love does not imprison. What was most surprising was what came next. Her son, realizing he had lost control, tried to come back. He brought gifts, vague apologies, promises that no longer moved her. But she didn't waver. She listened. She thanked him, and she kept her distance. Because sometimes, it's in distance that dignity finds a home. And to resist, even in the face of emotional appeal, is an act of self-love. She described that moment as a flower blooming at the end of autumn, when no one expects it anymore. when everything seems finished. But there, among dry leaves and old memories, something new is born. Fragile, yes, but firm, alive, and whole. Maybe you are at that point. Maybe you're still waiting for the message that never comes, the gesture that never arrived. But maybe, like her, you too can find your flower, your place of peace, your table set for one, but full of dignity. Because even if your children don't see it, you are still worthy of love, of respect, of care. And there is still time, there is still life, there is still you, whole, at peace, at home.